So actually, Evan, you said you started as a response to market failure.
Yes.
And there was market failure in 2009, and there is still market failure today. I just wanted to see if that's generally, first of all, the view of the panel. It would seem from this morning that there's going to be more market failure than less. Does that mean that everything is awesome, and that your businesses are all now more sustainable than they were in 2009, where sustainability of not-for-profit was a major issue? I mean, you clearly feel very sustainable, Evan.
Well, I do, but I like to say that we're succeeding, not that we've succeeded. I think that, we're a certain number of miles into the marathon, but we're not at the finish line yet, not even close. And I think it's too early to pronounce this model, any nonprofit model, to be a success. I do think that we've certainly learned a lot in our case, over the 6.5 years about what works and what doesn't, and we're still learning. Look, one thing I'm very proud to say is that my colleagues in the Capitol Press Corps in Texas have come roaring back to a large degree. The Houston Chronicle, San Antonio Express, Dallas Morning News, and on have added reporters back since 2009, have shown a real competitive sense and a public service obligation. And I think that the environment in the Capitol Press Corps today is significantly better than it was back in 2009, but I still think that a market failure in general exists in that the state's population is growing, not shrinking. The problems of the state are getting more complicated and not less complicated, and yet there is still an inadequate amount of coverage of this stuff for a state that desperately needs it.
Sorry. So does anybody else want to pick up on that? Is everything? When are we going to start to see not-for-profits fail?
Well, you already have, right? I mean,
yep.
We're all sitting here, but I mean, the Chicago News Cooperative, the Bay Citizen, I think, was in a manner of speaking merged into CIR, but I don't think Joaquin would object if we described it as largely unsuccessful, right?
I would nuance that.
And there have been others. So, I mean, I don't think anybody would suggest that just because you're a nonprofit, that's a magic bullet. I think, to go back to your question, market failures need to be looked at market by market. In investigative reporting, I don't think anyone would dispute that there is a continuing market failure, and it's very hard to see where that ends. In State House reporting, I can say something that Evan probably can't, which is I think he and the Texas Tribune may have spurred the revival of State House reporting in Texas. In the country as a whole, as I see it, there's no question that there is a worsening market failure, and I think that those are not the only areas.
I'm just going to add, there's a subtext to your question, which is that what's bad news for legacy media is good news for us in the nonprofit world. And I think that's yet to be tested. But I think it's very clear that the continued erosion in the traditional media makes us more necessary.
So the Bay Citizen was a multi-million-dollar startup, nonprofit startup, that hired up an incredible team of journalists and actually did great work, worked with the New York Times for its first couple of years. When we merged that organization, we iterated on the model. We changed CIR a lot through that merger as well. But I think what's instructive is, I'll cite Aaron Glantz, who was a reporter originally with the Bay Citizen and started on a story about wait times and access to health care that veterans were struggling with at the VA in Oakland is where it started. And then through our application of our data team and sort of through the partner network, we really did turn that into a national story. He went on to report, and we built a big national database and distributed it to partners on overprescription of opiates to veterans. And that became the foundation. That was the first story we ever did on the radio show. So I feel like in a place like San Francisco, in a place like New York, there's enough resources for the survivors of the apocalypse to regroup and build little outposts. We're not doing enough. The nonprofit sector is not doing enough to solve the problem in markets that don't have those kinds of resources. Evan's example here is extraordinary, but Austin is a kick-ass town that has South by Southwest. You've proven that you can build things with good leadership and commitment. I'm really worried that there are so many local stories which are never going to see the light of day. Flint, without some kind of extraordinary luck in many cases. And I feel like we need to leverage our resources to the degree that we're able to help fill in the rest of the map.
May I add a tiny bit just to...
Sure, please do.
I think there's a difference, and this is not the economics team, but there's a difference between market failure and organizational failure. I think there is clearly a market failure going on in journalism where there is insufficient revenue from advertising to sustain the traditional business model. That is a market failure. Non-profits are stepping into that to some extent. But then there's organizational failure, which is if you don't get the model right, if you waste money, if you do poor journalism, or if you run the organization badly, then all organizations, whether for-profit or non-profit, will fail. And I think we're seeing good examples around that, and I desperately hope not to be the person who, for that happens to at a 26-year-old organization. These places aren't going to exist in perpetuity unless they're well run. And I think that's a really, that's where Dick comes from. I know very much. There's a management aspect to this that nobody owes us a living here.
And that, well, the running into perpetuity is a key point as well, because there was a point, particularly in the development of not-for-profit news in the States, where almost everybody I spoke to said, our aim is to, this is a bridge. This is a bridge, and to Bill's point, it now sounds like we're not really talking about a bridge over a brief period of market failure. We're talking about something which is very permanent in the ecosystem. Yes. And actually, to Joaquin's point, it would be, again, sort of question for the panel, which is, what do we now? What do you collectively need to do now? What do the foundations who have been funding this and the individuals who have been funding it now need to do, given that it doesn't look as though we're ever going to get to a point where you won't be needed, or where the market will succeed?
For me, I think what Evan and the Texas Tribune doing with that mixed model is absolutely extraordinary. I do think we have to deploy all the entrepreneurial, commercial tools at our disposal to run advertising well, to run commercial relationships as well. Currently, the Center for Public Integrity takes no corporate money and no government money, and that's incredibly important to us. But I think all of these organizations need to be creative about how they do events, how they're supported, and really it's going to require incredible business development and development discipline in there, as well as good journalism.
I think a big part of it is to explain to the American people that this is one of the things that is not going to exist in our society. And I don't mean the press as a whole, because I think there will be important parts of the press that will exist on a for-profit basis, but there are important parts of the press that will not without nonprofit support. And that is something the American people very well understand about private universities, about art museums and history museums and symphonies and ballets and a zillion other things. And I think if we can explain that, and I think we've made great strides to explaining that in the last 8 years to the American people, that there will be sufficient support in many places. I agree with Joaquin, not necessarily every place, which is a concern, but at the national level and in many places, that it will be sustainable.
I think that I would almost take there's another lens to look at this through. If the Hunger Games had a taco truck, the food in the United States was terrible when I was a kid, right? It was Denny's. It was total shit. Pardon my French, my English. And then it was viewed that it would never get any better, right? And you can't walk into most mid-sized cities in America right now without some kind of like taco truck scene that has just cropped up. Right, and all of this creative work is being applied in food. Now food is like hot again. And I really feel like it's not from the capitals, it's from the districts where Katniss Everdeen is growing up right now. We need to enable new kinds of leaders, new kinds of voices who can start at the taco truck and then build into the empire. We just need to diversify, in addition to all of this, diversify how people are coming to the space. Chris is here from Minnesota Public Radio. They have 100 reporters in their newsroom. He is starting up now an investigative team in Minnesota. Like, we've got some signs of life out there, but I think major foundations, they try hard and they do a good job. I think we need to support them in finding, in addition to always supporting us, please continue, finding opportunities to support the startups that have the possibility of really scaling and who are bringing something really new to the party.
I would say, to the people who funded our good and important work over the years, thank you, but your work, as our work, is not ending, it's beginning. The fact that many of us here have figured out ways to pay for the work that we've done over these years. Bill is the baby, and maybe Peter's or Joaquin's organization is the oldest. That doesn't mean that it's now time to move on down the line to something else. I know the tendency can be for funders to say, well, we've supported an organization like one's represented up here for a certain number of years. Now it's time for you to fly and be free. And there's something to that, I acknowledge. But this shit does not pay for itself. This work that we do is hard and important, and it is expensive, and it has value. And I just want to say, I would want to say to funders, understand that you don't only need to invest in things that may theoretically work. To Joaquin's point, invest in things that are working. Invest in the idea that this work does have value, and help us figure out ways in which we can ensure that this kind of work continues past all of us. One of the challenges that we all face at these organizations is what happens after the mulch is overturned, after the leadership of these organizations changes, and after it's a new generation that takes the baton from all of us. We're running a long play here. And it would have been a Pyrrhic victory for any of these organizations to have done 5 or 6 or 10 years of great work, and then all of a sudden the funders go, okay, our work is done here, and move on. We're at the beginning and not the end of this whole process.
I was just going to say, I think everybody up here admires what Texas Tribune has done in terms of diversifying its revenues. You know, corporate advertising, sponsored events, membership, and then the more traditional philanthropy. But there's a limit to how far and how fast that can be developed. I mean, for one thing, I can imagine advertisers wanting to sponsor coverage in Texas of Texas news. It's a little harder to imagine which advertisers want to put their ad next to a story about rape in prison. Also, it takes tremendous bandwidth to organize an ad sales department or an events department. You really need like an Evan, essentially, to pull that off.
I mean, there is a point, actually, because I know that Evan, you put your budget figures up there, and Dick, you said so that's about $6 million per year, slightly north of that. Dick, you were saying you've got a budget of $13 million. Bill, do you disclose what your overall annual run rate is at the Marshall Project at the moment?
4.6.
4.6, and what's the ICIJ and CPI, Peter?
It's about 8.3 million this year.
We're 9.4 this year.
Right, so this is sort of between you, we have this kind of powerhouse, if you like, of journalism up here, and it's all done for a fraction at the moment of the cost of most large news organizations. I mean, your editorial budget, Bill, at the New York Times was 200 million. 200 million. And so when we talk, I mean, one of the ways in which everybody here has really helped, I think, the existing businesses by innovating on and doing good journalism on a much lower cost base. You know, are we at the bottom of that cost base? Is there more that we can do to, if you like, sort of make journalism sustainable?
Well, just one quick thing, which I think is also important before you get to somebody who wants to actually answer that question, which is original digital news, which all of us are in, is also dramatically more efficient. So Bill's budget was $200 million, but for the New York Times, a great newspaper, and when I was the assistant publisher of the Wall Street Journal, it was pretty much the same, spent perhaps 15, maybe 17% of all the money it took in on news. And those legacy news organizations are still back. The numbers are a little bit better than that as they decline in print, but they're not much different. And we are exactly the flip side of that. We spend 85% of what we spend on news. So that is an enormous advantage in efficiency for a digital news organization generally, and I think it's an important point never to lose.
I also feel like we need to develop platforms that we can all have equity in or get efficiencies out of. We really try to focus with launching our weekly show on supporting newsrooms that don't have audio producers. We do a ton of trainings. We do like a training a week at this point. We send sound kits out. We sent 2 to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism a year ago in London, and they just made it to the show with an amazing piece on on the refugee situation in Europe. So I do feel like in the coffee breaks and other sessions, I mean, this is the room that we need to be talking to look for those opportunities through collaboration to kind of expand the equity and leverage the budgets that we have, quite frankly, because I recognize ours is a lot larger than most in the nonprofit sector.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
It would be remiss of me not to talk just a tiny bit about the ICIJ's project, which, the ICIJ's project budget is around $2 million a year. So that impact has been delivered by our work, but also by the use of the collaborative tools and the incredible power of all of those 370 people that worked on it. So there is a flywheel, there's an exponential effect, whatever you want to call it, whether it's, I'm still thinking about taco trucks at the, but can I just, Jeff Jarvis is sitting here tweeting like a mad thing, like I was before as well, but Jeff's raised a point about profitability, and I want to be kind of vulgar here and mention James Murdoch, because he made a remark at Edinburgh lecture a few years ago about, and it was practically out of the book of Ayn Rand, the only guarantee of independence is profitability. And as Randian as that is, there is a certain truth to that. Yeah. And so, I wouldn't want to think that, I think the non-profit model, in all of its complexity and all of its need for other sources, is one direction, but it isn't the only direction. I'm not a Randian, but I might as well be.
Emily, the answer to the question of whether there are more efficiencies to be found in the expense side of our businesses is there better be. And it's just it's a reality check. The existential anxiety that I have, the thing that causes me to bolt upright at 3 o'clock in the morning, is as we've continued to grow on the revenue side, we've also continued necessarily to grow on the expense side. If you run an organization that is primarily people, that's our overwhelming, I think each of us would probably say that the overwhelming expense line in our budget is people. They have a reasonable expectation they're going to be paid a little bit more year over year. Benefits costs go up, parking costs go up, on and on and on. Organically, without really doing a whole lot, you can increase your expenses by a certain amount year over year. And the problem is it becomes this beast that ate Cleveland if you're not careful. I worry a little bit existentially that we're going to all, at some point, if we continue to grow and continue to have to grow the expense side, that we're going to collapse under our own weight. So I think, do we need to find efficiencies across the industry, across organizations? The answer is we better. I don't think it's a dire problem, but I think that we would be smart strategically and tactically if we began to think about if we need to be replicating a lot of functions across the industry and across organizations, and if we couldn't we wouldn't be better served finding efficiencies.
Dick, you're looking. Oh, right. Well, so for instance, so first of all, I want to go to the audience for questions. So if you have one, put your hands up, and we'll get a microphone to you. There's one up there immediately. Or you could, come to a mic. So you have to come down the perilous stairs. Please don't fall down and hurt yourself. And if you do, hold the rail. And if you do, don't sue us. Well, actually, what I was going to ask was on the cost side. I mean, presumably everything that we're seeing now from platforms being poured into distribution and low-cost tools, which has scared the Jesus out of commercial organisations, is actually incredibly good news, is it not, for the non-profit?
Yes, but doing crap is cheap. Doing great is harder and more expensive, and expensive can be time. It doesn't have to be cash. So I would never try to convince somebody that you can do amazing work on the cheap. You can't. You can either commit a lot of time for free, or you can spend money to condense that. That being said, great ideas, in my experience, have a strange ability to be cheap in the beginning, and just enabling that and having some courage around that, I think, is really important.
Okay, terrific. So I'm going to go that side first, and then we have a take from this side. It's like being the person at the airport who does the passports, and you're thinking, they're taking more from that side than my side. Sorry.
My side first. So my name's Daniela Gerson. I'm with the LA Times. And I was interested when the Panama Papers were released, there was one report I heard that said it couldn't have been done, the collaboration, without the technological tools that we have today. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to those tools and perhaps the other newsrooms as well. Are there tools that are emerging that are helping you collaborate better?
Well, yes, there are. I mean, it's very clear. I mean, imagine many of you use...
It's on Newton's.
Many of you use Slack. We use Slack, but Slack wasn't really a central part of this particular platform. I think that's absolutely correct. I'd also just say a word slightly about, I don't think we've even seen the beginning of true disintermediation in journalism and the effect of technology in journalism, and we need to improve our workflow dramatically. The reporting is the expensive part, and it's where we need to invest. I think there is still unbelievable friction in publishing, and I'm hoping to talk to Trey from Vox more about that. The platform that the ICIJ created is a couple of years old, and they build, or they have historically built, a specific instance of it for every one of their of these big projects. It is, to use a simple phrase, a Facebook for journalists. It's a closed workspace that requires double-factor authentication and allows the journalists who've been invited to participate in that project and nobody else access to the documents, and it gives them a space to share information about what they've discovered, share it so the Brazilians can share their Petrobras findings with the people in Panama or the people in Tierra del Fuego. Actually, Tierra del Fuego is in Brazil, of course. Oh, no, Argentina. But they can share it with anybody else in the group, and that will become more and more practical. But that could not have been done with previous forms of technology. I mean, these people were working 24 hours a day around the world, sharing information, getting access to the documents in a secure environment, which was also safe for them.
Thanks, Peter. Question over here.
Okay, Jonathan Groves from Drury University. This is for Evan. I wondered, we hear a lot about events as part of the revenue model. And
Yes.
I was wondering if you would just share with us a little bit what your advice would be for running a good event, and then if you would be willing to share what was an event that the Texas Tribune had that was a complete bust.
I might have more examples of the latter than you'd think. But, you know, it's like the cliche says, you learn from failure, and hopefully you do better next time. So I certainly don't mind when things don't go well, because you ultimately do better as a result of that. Look, we'll do $1.7 million, I think is the number I'm now spitballing, but I think it's $1.7 million in revenue this year. The vast majority of those dollars are sponsorships. Every event but the Texas Tribune Festival is free to attend. So about 160,000 or 170,000 of that will be ticket sales to the festival. The balance will be sponsorship. So the first thing to know is that you've got to make it as easy as possible for people to attend, and the easiest possible way is to have there be no expense. So it's free to attend. All the events are the same. Free to attend, except for the big festival, which is not free to attend, but the balance of the events. Free to attend, open to the public, on the record, which we love, right? Anybody can, you don't have to be a member, you don't have to be a donor, you can come. Right? We have elected officials and newsmakers on a stage like this one, in front of an audience like this one. We ask questions typically for 2/3 of the time, and we bring the audience in to ask questions for the last third. Often, if not always, these are people who represent the people in the audience who we have up on stage with us, and because elections in Texas are not competitive, there's not an enormous amount of motivation for the politicians on that stage to have done very many of these events, where they don't know the questions in advance, or it's not a friendly crowd. So we're putting them in front of their constituents who are getting to actually, in a very literal way, speak truth to power. It is accountability journalism in real time. And so I recommend that that be a template for an event. You all have, everybody has elected officials, mayors, city council members, congressmen, governors, commissioners of education. Those people have an obligation to tell the people who they work for why they're doing what they do, why they're not doing what they don't. And there's an inherent public service imperative in them doing that. By the way, we also provide lunch. So actually and that's free. I've decided after talking about this for a while that the new motto for public media should be, public media, we lose money on this deal. Because ultimately we're providing something not only for free, but we're actually going over and above that and providing lunch, because we want the public to have an opportunity and a motivation to turn out. This is as far as I'm concerned, these events are the purest realization of our mission possible.
You need a taco truck, Evan. That's what I'm.
Yes, apparently. And I apparently need like Katniss Everdeen to serve them or something. I'm still going back to what you said before. So.
I'm glad to hear that not-profit news organisations run on exactly the same basis as the universities, which is you put out free food and everybody comes to your event. It's amazing.
We have no shame about that at all.
I'm going to take another question from there, then go over there.
So I'll circle back to the taco trucks again. I'm coming from one of the poorest regions in the country, the Mississippi Delta, with students from the Mississippi Delta whose program for journalism was just cut completely by the administration. So I want to ask, I guess the panel as a whole, but specifically Joaquin, how do you not only invest in your own future, but the future of the profession as a whole, and how do we create the storytellers that you want to have in your newsrooms for the future?
Tell me what school you're at.
Delta State University.
So I want you to work with us starting tomorrow. Like we built an investigative lab in partnership with the Alabama Media Group, which is owned by Advance, but they've had the papers traditionally in the state of Alabama. We took on, they led it, prison reform in the state. They've been on that for the last 2 years. They're a publishing partner with ours now. We've just had a story there over the last 3 days about, in the state of Alabama, if you are a child care center that is attached to a church, you get no state oversight. And so we've been reporting on that and threats to kids. We have a deep commitment in the South specifically. We have a lot of partners in New Orleans. I've been looking for an opportunity to add Mississippi to that mix. So let's just start. And then what I would say to your students is, be ambitious, be about Mississippi. Mississippi is one of the more interesting, compelling states in the nation. We never hear about it unless somebody's cracking a joke, honestly. We need to bring Mississippi into this dialogue. And when I think about the Marshall Project, issues of criminal justice, issues of voter rights access, issues of race, and also the rich tradition in that state, I just feel like I would love to have a chance to work with you guys.
Excellent.
Let's just talk at coffee.
Yes, that's very good. That's a very good look under your seat moment there, from which is great, and why these conferences are so fantastic. Does anyone else have any? Because again, that's a thought which some of you touched on, which is there are areas which are not as privileged as the areas you're working in, and how do we get out there and do local journalism, which really has been decimated by web scale in this country.
Just one other thing about Mississippi, come down when we're done, because there is somebody who is in a privileged position who is trying to start something similar to, I think, most similar to what Evan does in Mississippi, and I think I could connect the two of you, and probably should.
Let me mention two things, and one of them is a plug for one of our reporters. One of the projects that we have at the moment is called No Way Up. It is supported by the Ford Foundation, if they're here, thank you very much. And it is a project about the removal of the rungs of middle class, of getting onto the rungs of being middle class in America. It's the loss of the American dream, really. That is all about going into poor communities, finding people living incredibly difficult lives, and asking why the hell they have such crap broadband when the people across the road have actually adequate broadband from the United States point of view. There's a story we've published today, and the Washington Post has published today, of one of our reporters, a woman called Tillia Buford, that's at Tillia Buford if you look her up on Twitter, which is about her admission that she missed the Flint story. Her mother lives in Flint. She grew up in Flint. And I think it's one of the I've only just read it, but I think it's one of the nicest pieces about something you kind of addressed in the Mississippi question, which is how to also be reflective and modest about the work that we do and think about how we serve the communities that we live in. And I think it's a really excellent piece to think about how you need to listen and how stories can happen in your own backyard, almost literally.
Thanks very much. Question over there.
Hi, I'm Adriana Villarreal with Drive West Communications here in Houston, in Texas, I should say. I'm curious on your thoughts because I haven't heard anything. I know, Evan, you talked a little bit about your staffing and that being such a major cost. And then earlier we heard the Dallas Morning News talking about the huge cuts that they're having. Obviously, we're feeling that across the industry. And so there are a large number and growing, unfortunately, of reporters who don't have a home. And I was curious about y'all's thoughts or your structures now with freelancers, and specifically how you thought that might help or not the quality of maybe enterprising stories with freelancers who have nothing to do but look for, they don't have to produce a number of stories every day. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on whether or not you think that could produce some more in-depth enterprising stories. Is there room for freelancers in your organizations?
Who wants to take that? Bill?
We do a fair amount of freelance. Everything from freelance essays by inmates in prison, which we do pay for, but not very much, but enough. It's a lot of money for a prison commissary. All the way up to people whom we pay the sort of going magazine rates. I mean, it's not cheap. And it's complicated working with freelancers until you've developed a kind of cadre of people that you know and trust. We've had a couple of experiences of freelance pieces that we had to kill because they just weren't good enough. We're great believers in freelance.
One of the best stories, or the stories I've enjoyed reading most in the Panama Papers, was written by a New York freelance writer called Jake Bernstein, which is about the dodginess of the global art market. I can say also that the entire package was edited to some extent by freelance editors. So we do value freelancers very much.
But it might be interesting if I don't know if funders have ever actually put a sort of reverse auction in place for freelancers to pitch stories, right, with a network of newsrooms that would then have access to them. There might be some ways to innovate around it, but I would just agree with everybody here in terms of we work with them, we try to come up with resources for them. I think it's hard though if you're going to try to live as a freelancer. It's not sustainable in the long run for most.
Okay, thanks. Question over that side.
Thank you. My name is Dan Gilgaff. I'm with National Geographic. And I wondered if you could talk about, obviously, impact. A lot of you have spoken to what an important metric that is, especially for your funders. And the baseline measure is how many readers you're reaching, how many people are viewing or watching or reading your stuff. And at the same time, a lot of you are hailing from, formerly from media organizations that had gigantic, distribution, social platforms that dwarf, your distribution platforms now and your social media footprints. And so I wonder if you could talk about maybe the challenge of building audiences for your journalism and how you've dealt with that. And I know that the model of partnering with some big media organizations, whether it be the Washington Post or whoever, is one model, but kind of like beyond that, how you build audiences.
The enduring frustration for me, having come from I was 18 years at Texas Monthly, a magazine that had a rate base, paid circulation. We had syndicated research that gave us as close to a good number of total readers that we could account for. The enduring frustration for me is that if you asked me straight away, what is your total audience, my answer would be, I can't tell you. Now, I can tell you my site traffic. I can cite that. I can tell you my social followers. I can talk to you about the number of news organizations that on a regular basis run our content. I can cite a number of event attendees on a one-off basis or over time. But if you asked me the number of eyeballs on my content, the Texas Tribune brand's content over time, anybody up here who said they had a sufficient way of calculating that would probably be exaggerating, if not lying. We are still at a nascent point in the analytics piece of this emerging slice of the business. And so, yeah, we're all trying a bunch of things in terms of strategy and tactics on audience, but in terms of measurement, it's really hard.
I would just two quick observations. I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said or that Evan said, but one is, social media is still a sufficiently recent phenomenon. I think it's important to step back occasionally and remember how unbelievable it is, in that if I had said just 10 years ago, we're going to have these ways where we're going to get all of our most enthusiastic and engaged readers to go share the story with half of everyone they know and all of the people they know who would care most about it immediately for free without our asking them to, you would say, that's incredibly cool and helps a lot, and it is and it does. And the very low barriers to entry there are great for upstart publishers, right? I mean, I believe the last time I looked, there are 5 newspapers in the United States that have a larger Twitter following than we do. They've been in business for hundreds of years. We've been in business for 8, right? So that's one. The second thing is something people don't talk about very much, and I think its counter is implicit in your question, which is I actually think if we had all of the data, that the audiences for these stories are pretty much on par with the audiences at all but the very largest media platforms, right? The dirty little secret of publishing today, for-profit publishing today in America, is per story page views, which no, local publisher or even national publisher wants you to know. Because the numbers are much lower than you think, and our numbers are actually, insofar as I've been able to tell, pretty comparable to theirs.
I don't also buy that volume is necessarily a proxy for impact. We have a social scientist who started as a postdoc fellow with us that the ACLS provided the funding for, Dr. Lindsay Green-Barber. I usually don't call her doctor. She now leads up a strategic research department. We've written white papers trying to come up with a new set of frameworks for this. But I would also take a step back for another reason, back to the quality thing. Like, I'm pretty sure Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch outsold Tribe Called Quest. But Tribe Called Quest had a much deeper impact. I'd rather be Tribe Called Quest.
Tribe Called Quest in a taco truck. It's compelling. We've saved the best till last. Jeff Jarvis.
Me again. I'm really struck by how much, because of your missions that you put up, because of the structure you have, you can do nothing but quality, right? And that's what you do is quality, and that's what you do is impact. And that's wonderful. But a lot of one of the many ways we're privileged in America is that we have a culture of philanthropy and generosity for public media and such. And other nations simply don't have that. They don't have the willingness to give, they don't have the foundations, or they don't even have the tax breaks, should one give. So I guess what I want to ask you is that if you were forced to be for-profit, and one more point obviously, is that the problem with for-profit media is the business model forces it into cats and Kardashians and repetition and waste and all those other problems, which we have to solve separately. So where's the bridge from you and the wonderful work you can do to the for-profit world? And answer that any way you want. It could be in the lens of if you were in another country and you had to do the work you did, how would you support it? Or it could be what lessons do you have for the for-profit media to push them from volume to value? You're making a great example, but I also want to see it come to the mainstream of the rest of media.
If I were David Cameron and I wanted to revive my reputation, I'd make journalism a tax-deductible occupation and a charity in the UK right now.
So the United States does have those big advantages, Jeff. You're absolutely right. I mean, modern big philanthropy started here, and very contemporary big philanthropy has also started here. And the tax breaks are a big deal. I will say one thing that we don't have is, with a couple of historic exceptions that I think are increasingly proving anomalous, is a culture consistent with public funding of media. I do not believe that it is, I don't believe that it is practical to expand public media in this country consistent with our political culture, but there are many other cultures where it is, and where it is also much more vibrant. So in the UK, for instance, which is just a country I know a little bit better, not as well as this one, obviously, they have a political culture that is consistent with much more robust public support, and they are not the only one. But that does get into questions of national culture. And what I always say about this is, in this country, if we did not have a written constitution, I believe we would have a civil war within weeks. The Brits don't have a written constitution, and they haven't had a civil war for hundreds of years. So, it just depends, and you need to look hard, I think, at the culture you're in and see what its advantages as well as its disadvantages are.
Anyone else want to take that? Because again, we're sort of coming back to this point of, we think this is never going to end. It's about making not-for-profit sustainable. Jeff is saying, what would you do if you had to?
The markets are very different what the challenges are. So Google has a 150 million euro initiative in Europe called the DNI, the Digital News Initiative. Let's see how it goes, right? Like, let's see if we can get a startup community.
But they do have that in Europe largely because actually there was real pushback from publishers there about how terrible Google were, where actually we're kind of quite friendly with them over here.
Right here.
And everyone seems so it's there's a kind of
past that, this is capital coming into a market. Let's see what happens. To your question, if I were in a market where threats to journalists are physical and quite violent, then I think you have to think about it differently. But I take the point, Jeff. I don't think that we can assume that this is replicable if you don't have these same conditions. And I feel like we need environments and platforms where we can try to help each other in ways that are meaningful and provide some cover where necessary, maybe some capital where necessary, and maybe actually just create relationships that do provide some protections in some cases, and others some encouragement is all, maybe that's what's needed.
Okay, just before we wrap, because I have promised Rosenthal that we will finish on time and buy a bit of time back, I just want each of you when we meet again in 5 years, what is the one thing that you would hope has either changed or that you will expect will make the conversation about the strength of not-for-profit kick on? So if there's one thing you could wish for, and it can't be, I'm afraid, what single billionaire philanthropist, what would it be?
In my heart of hearts, I hope that in 5 years we get a handle on the problem of unequal access to the digital age in communities of color. Because here we are doing all this important work. Many of us are operating in states where the population is changing rapidly, but it's a Pyrrhic victory indeed if we create all this amazing content intended to be consumed online, but entire communities have no access to online in the same way. I think we have a digital divide problem that we need to solve before we can really solve a civic engagement problem, and I'd like to see in 5 years us closer to solving the first so we can solve the second.
Amen to that. I would also say that in 5 years, I hope we would be able to say that each of us and a lot of people in our industry successfully managed through the recession.
Which is coming when exactly?
Sometime in the next 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to think that in 5 years we will have an answer to Jeff's question, which is how you can do this, what, in addition to nonprofit, we can do to sustain quality journalism, because that, I love being in the nonprofit sector. I think it's got a big future ahead of it, but it's not going to supplant all of the journalists who've lost jobs and the readers who are willing to read complicated, challenging journalism.
I can barely look 12 to 18 months ahead, let alone 5 years, but I would say that for my own organization, I would like it to be recognized as the most modern and best funded investigative journalism organization in the world. That would mean that it had multiple sources of income that were relatively evenly distributed amongst those proportions. So, 30% philanthropic, 30% leadership, 30% earned income, that kind of thing. And I realize there's a small percentage missing there. But I'd like it to be on a much more sustainable basis, and I'd like it to have a year's reserve to get through Dick's recession.
This all sounds pretty good. I think we need to launch I wouldn't say international because that's a little arrogant. And when the U.S. goes international, you got to kind of see what happens. I would like us to launch a national laboratories initiative where in communities like Mississippi and Akron, we are finding a focused investment strategy to lift up journalism that works in those communities so we don't have more Flints. We have actually a public health crisis that is actually upon us because of the lack of investigative journalism. So if there was, if avian flu were breaking out and tens of millions of people were potentially impacted, we would be approaching it like a national security issue. And I think for the United States to let go of some of these communities is an absolute threat to our national security, to our public health. So I actually think that we need to launch an initiative to do something about it. And even if we die trying, I think that 5 years from now, we should be talking about what happened through that national initiative.
Fantastic, and hopefully in 5 years' time you'll all come back and meet at the Knight Foundation taco truck, which will be parked just out there.
It'll be the revealed taco truck.
It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much indeed, panel.